Your best friend thinks you're broke, not struggling, not desperate, just behind. The one who's still figuring it out while everyone else buys houses and posts vacation photos. She's not wrong to think that. You built that impression yourself, one silence at a time. And tonight, when she offers to spot you $50 for dinner, because that's the version of you she knows, you're going to say yes. Because saying no would require a conversation you're not ready to have. Here's the number she doesn't know, $6.2 million. Stay with me because this isn't a story about luck or crypto or some secret you can buy in a course. It's about what happens to a person's life when they make one decision at 24 and simply never make the opposite decision again. And it's about what that decision costs you in ways nobody warns you about. Costs that have nothing to do with money at all. Rewind 25 years. You're 24, sitting on the floor of a rented room in a shared house because you couldn't afford the deposit on somewhere alone. Warehouse job, $9.50 an hour to start, bumped to 11 after probation. Nothing about this night looks like the beginning of anything, except one thing. You'd just gotten your first real paycheck stub with a number on it that felt like something. And you did the thing almost nobody your age does. You didn't spend it. You didn't even plan to save it. You just didn't move it anywhere. It sat in the account, and a strange feeling came with that. Not excitement, something quieter, almost like relief. That feeling is the entire story. Everything else is just repetition. You want to know what nobody tells you about wealth built slowly? It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like nothing happening, over and over for years, while everyone around you insists something should be happening. 3 years later, you're 27, and this is where most versions of this story lie to you. They tell you there was a plan. There wasn't. There was a Tuesday. You'd just gotten a raise, not a big one, enough to notice. And your flatmate, the one who always seemed to be doing better than you, better car, better clothes, better everything, turned to you and said something you never forgot. You're not going to upgrade anything, are you? It wasn't a question. It was almost an accusation, like your refusal to spend was somehow a judgment on the way he lived. You didn't answer. You just smiled and changed the subject, the way you'd learned to do anytime money came up. But that night you opened your banking app and looked at a number for the first time with something other than anxiety. $11,400. Not life-changing, not even close, but it was proof of something. Proof that the strange, boring, invisible habit, don't move the money, don't explain the money, don't discuss the money, actually worked, so you kept going. Here's something nobody mentions when they talk about this kind of life. At some point, it gets tested. Not by a market crash, by a person. You were 29, dating someone for the first time who seemed serious. The kind of serious where conversations start drifting toward shared apartments and shared bills. And one night, over a cheap dinner you'd both agreed to, because neither of you had extra that month, they asked you directly, "Do you have any savings at all, like for emergencies?" It was a fair question, a reasonable one, the kind any responsible partner should ask. And you had, at that point, just over $34,000 sitting quietly across 2 accounts. You said, "A little, not much." That sentence took less than 2 seconds to say, and it changed something in you permanently. Because it worked. They nodded, satisfied, a little reassured that you were at least trying, and the conversation moved on to something else entirely. Nobody got hurt. Nothing bad happened. But you'd learned something dangerous. The lie was easy, frictionless. Nobody double-checked. Nobody asked to see a statement. The gap between what you had and what people believed you had was entirely yours to manage, and you just discovered you were good at managing it. That relationship ended 8 months later for reasons that had nothing to do with money. But the habit it taught you outlived it by 2 decades. At 31, you did the thing that actually changed everything, and it wasn't dramatic at all. You'd saved consistently for 7 years. Retirement accounts maxed where you could max them. A modest brokerage account fed automatically every payday, same amount, same funds, rain or shine, boring on purpose. And you had, for the first time, something that felt like real money sitting in cash. Just over $90,000, doing nothing but earning interest. A coworker mentioned, almost as an aside, that his uncle had made a fortune buying small residential rental properties in unfashionable towns nobody was watching. You didn't say anything. You went home and researched for 4 months before you told a single soul. And even then, the only soul you told was a mortgage broker. You bought a 3-bedroom house in a town you'd never lived in for barely above what it would have cost to rent a decent flat in the city. Tenants moved in within 5 weeks. The rent covered the mortgage with about $200 left over each month. $200. That was it. That was the whole beginning. Nobody in your life knew this house existed. Not your parents, not your closest friend. It sat quietly 300 miles away, generating almost nothing, while your public life continued to look exactly the same. Same second-hand car, same modest apartment, same jokes about being between paychecks. Nobody tells this part either, because it doesn't fit the highlight reel. But you can't understand the ending without it. You were 33 when the market turned. Badly. In the space of about 5 months, the paper value of your brokerage account dropped by almost 30%. 30% of everything you'd spent 7 years quietly building, gone from a number on a screen, seemingly overnight. You didn't panic sell. That's the version of the story people expect. The disciplined hero who never wavers. It's not true. You sat awake more than one night that year, doing math that scared you, running scenarios where the market never recovered, where the rental sat vacant for months, where the whole quiet architecture you'd built collapsed and left you with nothing to show for a decade of saying no to things. At the lowest point, you almost told your sister everything. You'd driven to her place on a Sunday specifically to say it out loud. I have money, more than you'd think, and right now I'm terrified I'm about to lose a chunk of it. Because the fear had gotten heavy enough that carrying it alone felt unbearable. You sat at her kitchen table, she made tea, and somewhere between the kettle boiling and the first sip, the moment passed. She started talking about her own week, a minor crisis with her landlord, a repair bill she couldn't quite cover. And you listened and offered what sounded like sympathy, but was actually guilt. And the confession stayed exactly where it had lived for 9 years, unsaid. You left her place and drove home and didn't sell a single share. 18 months later, the market had not only recovered, it had gone well past where it started. The rental had never once sat vacant. The fear in hindsight had been real, but the catastrophe hadn't been. This is the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. The wins look inevitable only after they've already happened. In the moment, they don't feel inevitable at all. They feel like standing at the edge of something and choosing, again, not to move. And this is the moment where most people would have said something. You didn't. After that year, something shifted. Not in your strategy. The strategy never changed. Same funds, same automatic transfers, same refusal to upgrade a life that was working exactly as designed. What shifted was your relationship to the silence itself. You stopped experiencing it as something temporary you were waiting to end, and started experiencing it as simply how your life worked. You bought a second rental at 36, a duplex this time, using the equity that had built quietly in the first property without you doing anything except waiting. At 38, the market shifted decisively in your favor, and both properties had appreciated in ways that felt almost embarrassing, given how little effort you'd put in beyond those first 4 months of research, nearly a decade earlier. By 39, your combined position, retirement accounts, brokerage, equity in 2 properties, crossed $500,000. You found out on a Sunday morning doing your annual review, the same ritual you'd kept since you were 26. Coffee, spreadsheet, silence. You stared at the number for a long moment. Then you closed the laptop and went to your nephew's birthday party, where your sister asked, in front of the whole family, if you'd thought about maybe getting a real savings account going one of these days. The same sister who, 6 years earlier, had almost heard the entire truth over a cup of tea she'd since forgotten making. You said you'd think about it. Everyone laughed, including you. Why not tell them? That's the real question underneath everything here. Not, how did you build the money? That part is almost boringly simple, and we'll get to the exact shape of it in a moment. The real question is, why hide it year after year, opportunity after opportunity, even when the fear had already proven survivable. The honest answer took years to arrive at, and it isn't flattering. Part of it was fear, the specific fear that comes from watching what happens to people the moment others learn they have money. The tone changes. The requests start. The favor that used to be free suddenly has an expectation attached. You'd watched it happen to a cousin who inherited a modest sum and became, overnight, the family's unofficial emergency fund, fielding calls at midnight from relatives who'd barely spoken to him in years. But the deeper part, the part you didn't admit even to yourself until much later, was that the getting by, still figuring it out version of you had become comfortable, familiar. It didn't ask anything of you. Revealing the truth would mean renegotiating every relationship in your life, and some part of you wasn't sure you wanted the version of those relationships that came after the reveal. So the silence continued, not out of shame, out of inertia. And inertia, it turns out, is far more powerful than any of the fears that started it. At 42, something happened that came closer than anything before it to breaking the silence for good. Your father called, not your mother. Your father, who almost never called just to talk. He'd had a health scare, minor in the end, but it had rattled him enough that he wanted, in his words, to get things sorted while I still can. He told you he and your mother had set aside a small inheritance for you and your sister, modest but meaningful to them, and he wanted to know honestly, no pride involved, whether you needed it more urgently than your sister did. He asked if you were struggling. He said it gently, the way people ask things they're afraid of the answer to. You sat with the phone against your ear for what felt like a very long time. Here was the moment, the door standing wide open. All you had to do was say, "Dad, I'm okay. I'm more than okay. You don't need to worry about this. Save it for yourselves. Save it for Mom." What you actually said was, "I appreciate it. Let's talk about it later." You didn't take the money. You also didn't correct the record. You let him keep believing there was a real question to answer, because closing that question honestly would have opened every other one behind it. He brought it up twice more over the following year. Both times you deflected. Eventually he stopped asking, and you told yourself that was a kindness, one less thing for him to worry about. Some nights you're less sure it was kindness. Some nights it looks a lot more like cowardice, wearing a thoughtful expression. At 42, you also crossed 1 million for the first time, combined across everything, the same month as your father's call, though you never told him that either. At 45, after a third property and a market run nobody could have predicted, the spreadsheet read $2.8 million. And this year, the January you turned 49, the number on the screen read $6.2 million. You sat with that number the exact same way you'd sat with every number before it. No champagne, no phone call. You made coffee. You looked at the same car you've driven for 11 years, still parked in the same spot, and you thought about the version of yourself who sat on a rented floor at 24 and simply chose not to move the money. Here's what that 25-year-old decision actually cost you. Almost nothing in the moment. A slightly older car, a few skipped upgrades, a handful of nights where you said no to things you genuinely wanted, a market scare that kept you up at night and passed, a phone call with your father you still haven't fully closed the loop on. And here's what it bought you: the specific, quiet, almost invisible feeling of a bill arriving and your pulse not changing at all. The feeling of a bad month at work not rearranging your entire nervous system. The feeling, and this is the one nobody prepares you for, of being fully, completely free while looking from every visible angle exactly the same as everyone else. Your best friend still doesn't know. Your mother still asks, gently, whether you're managing okay. Last month, she offered to help cover your car insurance, just until things ease up. You told her you appreciated it and that things were actually fine, and she said the things she always says, that she just worries, because that's what mothers do. You didn't correct her. You're still not sure if you ever will. Because here's the uncomfortable truth underneath this whole story. The one thing that actually matters more than any number given to you tonight. The version of you that everyone loves. The scrappy one, the modest one, the one who's still figuring it out, that version isn't a lie you're telling them. It's the version of you that built the $6 million in the first place. The caution, the plainness, the refusal to need anything from anyone. That wasn't a costume you put on for other people. That was the actual mechanism. Take it away, and there's a real question whether any of the rest of it would have happened at all. And some quiet part of you understands that if you ever fully let that version go, you're not sure who takes over the spreadsheet next January. If there's a lesson buried in 25 years of silence, it's this. The wealth was never the interesting part. Almost anyone who saves consistently refuses to inflate their life every time their income rises and survives at least one real scare without flinching, ends up somewhere similar, given enough time. That part is closer to arithmetic than magic. The interesting part, the part worth sitting with tonight, is the psychology. What are you willing to look like, for how many years, in exchange for what you actually want to be? What do you owe the people who love you in terms of the truth, when the truth might change how they see you forever? Because the real trade in this story was never money versus poverty. It was always the appearance of struggle versus the freedom of never explaining yourself to anyone. Nobody warns you which one is harder to live with once you've had it a long time.